Well, interestingly enough, I was looking at I was like, what would you call a podcast like talking about general GMing stuff? And I was like, well, behind the screen. Then I realized paradoxically, you don't use a screen and neither do I.
Yeah.
So I realized that that actually might be one of the better points of topic, at least as far as the first episode.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know. Why do you generally not use a GM screen? Because I noticed in D20 you also don't hide your dice rolls.
Yeah. So how to phrase this? I think the purpose of DM screen is mostly to save the players. It lets you lie about the fact that the bad guy's crit, right?
Yeah.
Rolling behind the screen allows the DM to just sort of decide what the bad guys have rolled. I think there's more tension and more honesty in just rolling in front of the players. And I think that the advantage of that makes up for the inability to save your players. It's very much a tone difference. If your DM has a screen, you should feel a little safer. If your DM doesn't have a screen, then dice has taken the wheel, and it might just be 20s all day.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing for me because I think that dice themselves are part of the storytelling element, and sometimes just screwing up or having the bad guy do really well is like a core component of what makes for interesting campaigns.
Yes. You play a dice game instead of a diceless game like Amber and Noblesse because you want to have a maniac have some input at the table. The players and the DM are collaboratively creating the story, but there's this invisible person named Dice, and the Dice doesn't care about any stories and just does totally random things. And weaving that into your collaborative storytelling is so valuable because it pushes you in directions that no one in the crew would ever have gone, and you see new opportunities that you just wouldn't have found.
Yeah, it can be a double-edged sword though, because you can build up an NPC of they're this big awesome fighter and then they just roll like trash and you can't really hide it if you don't have a screen.
Right. No, like you said, it's you're working without a net, which makes the tricks more impressive, but also means sometimes you splat.
Yeah. In the one of the sessions we had recently, an NPC was like, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to execute you." And as he does this, one of his snipers shoots, and it would have been terrible if that sniper had just whiffed. But in fact, the sniper critted for max damage. I was like, that is appropriately vibe. The dice were like, "No, this guy passes the vibe check."
Yeah, he's a very serious man.
But I also feel I don't know, GMing with a screen to try and save your players is almost as if the GM hasn't prepared for a failure state. You don't have a plan if the bad guy just beats the crap out of your players.
Well, speaking on behalf of Screenkind, right? There's a lot of last-minute corrections you can do. If a player seems to be particularly down, you can just decide that they've done enough hit points to kill the monster. You can... Behind a screen, you can massage a lot more of the game. Just dice is quieter when the DM's dice are not real. I'm taking it for granted, by the way, that all DMs lie about what happens behind the screen. That's why they have a screen. If you're a DM who doesn't lie and has the screen, you can just take the screen away.
Yeah.
But it's there are advantages to the screen, right? I don't think they outweigh the disadvantages, but it lets you sort of massage the moment-by-moment experience of your game in a way that's very powerful.
Yeah, I feel like having no GM screen or rolling the dice in front of the players, as you said, it's this moment of, it creates a lot of tension because the players know what's on the dice is final, and they're not going to get an artificial result. So it could be really bad for them, or it could be great.
Exactly.
But overall, I think randomness in a campaign is important because if you don't have randomness and it feels like the players can just always succeed, they start reacting to the world in a very unrealistic way. So for me, that's one of the core advantages to not having a screen and just rolling the dice in front of the players.
I agree with you. I think that you keep people very honest when you're like, well, if you fail to save with advantage, you fucking die, and they react in a very different way when they're about to roll those dice.
Yeah, in general, I feel like a GM, it's not a question of good or bad GMing, but in general, you should have an idea for a failure state if dice are being rolled. And if you don't, why are you rolling dice?
Yes. One of the things I like to see in, I don't know, I forget which game it was in. It might have been Lancer or a different one, but it was failures move the story forward. If the players are trying to climb a wall and they roll well, they climb the wall. If they're trying to climb the wall and they roll badly, they climb the wall and they set off the alarm. You never have a roll that, when it fails, just puts you back in the state, you know? If they're trying to decipher a code and they roll well, they get it right. If they really roll badly, a demon in the book drags them into hell. You know, like, everything has to move the story. And you don't give them a dice roll that has a number that you don't want to play. The classic is new DM will be like, okay, there's an inscription above the door in an ancient language. Everybody roll an intelligence save to understand it. And then all 4 players fail. And you can see his shoulders slump because he doesn't get to say his cool line.
But it's also like, okay, I guess we're just here now. Like, where do we go at this point in the campaign?
It's like, you got to, you know, if you just want to say the words, have it be written in common, right? You know? Don't ever ask them to make a roll if every number that can come up on that dice is not a number that you're happy to play. And I think that's just good, you know, fundamentals of DMing.
Yeah, the only time I would say it's like getting too bad GMing is if you actively want the players to fail. Even then, like for like challenge dungeons or something like that, that can also be kind of engaging. But it just kind of, it's a read your players kind of thing.
Exactly, right. Like, there's a world of difference between making it hard for the players to succeed and wanting them to fail. The DM can make them fail, right? You'll never run out of dragons. The player who wants to have a pissing contest with the DM is a challenge to be dealt with, not an opponent to be overcome. But the the difference of being like, it's hard for you to succeed at this task in the world, the reason you establish that is so that they will feel accomplishment when they do succeed at that task.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's one of those, like, getting to a point where the players have set themselves up beforehand to succeed narratively and making the role easier and passing is also really fulfilling because it makes the players feel like they solved some kind of puzzle.
Yes. And never underestimate or don't get too complicated with it, right? Like, the DM will be like, they're going to see that this guy's a weakness to A, and they're going to think, oh, he's trying to trick us, and so they'll bring B, but actually B was the real trap, and that puts them into this thing, and I'm like, they're going to feel like geniuses if they bring fire to fight the wood monster, okay? Like, you always need to keep things much more basic. Players are not as invested in your game as you are. If you ever do a double bluff where an NPC pretends to have a weakness, but really it's their strength, the players will be like, this is Moriarty. Like, I've never seen such an ingenious foe. You can't be having that in every encounter, you know? That has to be saved for the big twist.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes there is, like, merit to just having the bad guy have the most obvious weakness imaginable.
And he needs to be really mad when you exploit it. Fire magic, how dare you? You know we're in the woods. Like,
you have a big, heavily armored NPC, and the party's like, what's his evasion? And I'm like, evasion? I don't know. You're probably hit it, whatever.
You used oil, jerk.
It's just one of those, like, it's a scenario where, like, failure states should exist, but ultimately, like, if there's no failure state and there's no penalty, such as time for failing, then why are the players even rolling? That's why I like the take 20 kind of philosophy.
Right, yeah, exactly. If failing doesn't move the story forward, let's just pretend you rolled something that does move the story forward, so that the story will go forward. I remember there was a moment in the game recently where, like, a bunch of missiles were coming together and the ship had just jumped away, and I was like, well, you can get out of the way, and the player's like, if I stay where all the missiles are hitting in space, will I actually die? And I remember thinking, I was like, I may have failed to convey that these are missiles in space. You shouldn't want to be where the missiles are hitting, man. There's nothing to hide behind. You're just in a missile.
How bad is it going to be if I get hit by a railgun? It's like, pretty bad? Like,
yeah. Our understanding of railgun is the gun that the party dodges, right? Like, we're all together in the idea that if the Death Star shoots at you, you don't block it with your lightsaber.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, it's if you do that, something very different is happening on the table.
But there's also like a scenario where you're not letting the player roll a dice because you don't even know what a failure state looks like.
Yeah, no.
It's like
The flip side of the other, right, is like you can't succeed at this, Jack, and the world still have integrity.
Yeah, it's like your player fails at making a sandwich by rolling a nat 1. You're like, I don't even know how to describe this narratively. You succeed. I don't care.
Yeah, I shouldn't have had you roll this. That's on me. And on we go. The Star Wars game we're currently rolling has all these like threat and favorability things, so you can succeed or fail, but with like weird consequences. And I've noted it's made me a lot more careful about what I ask for rolls on. Because otherwise, the player will open a door and generate 5 threat, and I'll be like, I think the devil's on the other side of the door, man. I don't.
Just you open the door, there's just Darth Vader. I guess you're successful.
How this? Yeah.
Roll initiative.
Wish you hadn't succeeded.
I think it was like it was one of the older campaigns where a player was like, "I would like to do this thing," and I'm like, "Okay, well the bad guys trust you and the NPCs trust you, and I'm not seeing any reason why this would fail or what a failure even looks like. So I guess you just succeed."
Yeah, like if a player has hoodwinked the bad guys and then they're trusting them, and you're like, "I want to jump them into deep space or whatever," that just happens, Like they shouldn't have trusted you. I'm always big on like letting the players get the payoff. It shouldn't be gated behind rolls. And while I'm on that subject, if you gate something behind a roll, that's typically where we're at. If you gate something behind 2 rolls, it's very feels bad if they fail the second roll. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, like layered rolls. You get all the way to the end of a sequence and it just like flops at the end. You're like, shit.
Yeah. You have to roll to hit, and then they get to roll a save, and then we see what the random. Nope. None of that. It's very in my mind important to make rolls actually mean things and not mean that you have the opportunity to roll more.
Yeah.
D&D rolling damage after a hit is narrowly okay, but I've got my eyes squinted at it.
Yeah. I don't know, like if you have a sequence of rolls, then you should at least make progress along that sequence so that you can eventually succeed, versus just like, oh well, you failed the third out of the roll, I guess it's just done, but you're gone.
Yeah. The classic D&D one, right? Roll to hit with some sort of ray, then the bad guy rolls a saving throw. And it's like, if I hit with the ray and he succeeds, nothing happens, which is exactly the same as if I missed with the ray, like there's 2 rolls that are really just 1 roll. Don't love that.
Yeah, systems like that where it's just excessive dice rolling gets a little dodgy. Hit and damage are fine to an extent, but like when you start getting like extra saving throws on top of it, it's like, why are we even here?
Yeah. It can cause consequences that the bad guy has to save against, but they shouldn't be able to save to avoid anything happening, because then, I'm in the weeds on like techno things, but the less number of gates between player declares intention and an action occurs in the world, the better.
Yeah.
Things should succeed or fail, and you should move on.
Yeah, broadly speaking, like I kind of agree with that philosophy. It's I don't know. I do like systems that have degrees of success, like the 5, 10, 15 kind of systems. Like I use that a bit in Lancer, even though the system like doesn't specifically support it.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think all DMs break in a system a little bit. I was playing Mutants and Masterminds at some point, and I was like, I need to triage a bit. This system does not work. I have one player who is breaking it over his knee. The rest of the party doesn't matter. I need to tone some things down, some other things up.
Yeah, so
that is a thing that really does happen a bit. When someone is in a crunchy frame and the other players aren't. You gotta make sure that all the players feel similarly heavy.
Yeah, you have the Superman problem. It's not fun being on a party with Superman, because anything that threatens Superman will obliterate you. But anything that you can fight, why are you even here? Superman will handle it. Right.
That's a perfect. Yeah, the Justice League is not an adventuring party, unless the system is set up such that they are. Like I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to harp on like possibilities. You can make it work, but the DM can't just respond to this by throwing waves of, I don't know, Doombots at them.
Yeah, ultimately, like, there is a bit of reading the room and essentially what your group is out for. Do you have like a Munchkin group or an RP group? And either or is fine, but it's when you get the weird mix that things start getting exceptionally janky.
So, there's a very old Dragon Magazine article I want to reference at this point. To your point about Munchkin group versus RP groups, this is going to be a bit of a deep dive, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, fair enough.
They posited a trinity approach of like what people want in games. There is gamist, simulationist, and narrativist, right? And a gamist player wants to play the system. He doesn't care really about why he's here. He wants the tactical challenge, right? When I first joined your Lancer game, I remember thinking that it was a pretty gamist game. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, players, is it the rebels or the other guys we support? And they were like, we don't know the names of these guys. What we do is fight the NPCs that show up on the map each week, right?
Yeah.
In a gamist game, what you're doing is you're trying to make your characters into the most tactically interesting versions of themselves to defeat the largest number of mobs, right? And there's a story around it, but mostly what we're here for is the crunchy, cool battle fun, right?
Yeah.
A narrativist game is The Legends of Zelda, right? Like, we're all here to experience the story of the players overcoming evil and saving the world. And it's like, it's all about the beats and the excitement of it, right? Like, it's about the things that are happening, making narrative sense and telling a satisfying story. And then a simulationist game is like the parts of open world games before you get to the final mission. Like, you know, you're in Fallout and you're wandering around and doing random shit, and the world reacts to it in a, I'm going to say realistic way, but, you know, realistic for
Yeah.
Fallout or Skyrim, right?
Yeah, realistic in air quotes.
Yeah, so it's this open world setting where, like, the players can do anything and the world responds to it in an appropriate way, right? And so every game has their own, like, place they find on this trinity of, like, simulation, narrativist, and gamist. The classic answer is, like, we open the last door in the base, what's inside, right? And in a gamist sense, the answer is the boss monster, right?
Yeah.
That's what's the most thing to be there. Narrativist sense, maybe it's the captive princess, maybe it's the secret codes. It is whatever the story next needs. You know, it's totally reasonable for it to open the door and the NPC is at your mercy, begging you guys, you know, not to kill him, and like now you have to make a moral choice or whatever, right?
Yeah.
In the simulationist sense, there's nobody because all the guys came and fought you at the door together because that was maximizing their odds of success.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what kind of game you're running and what kind of game the players think they're in needs to settle into a sync at some point.
Yeah, the big issue is when you have like different players in the group have different perceptions of the type of game they're in.
Right, and that's huge. That's your session zero, right? You know, you need to establish, whether in so many words or not, like, is this game a sandbox, you know, Fallout, Skyrim style? Is this game Link? Is this a story? Or is this game a bullet hell shooter, right? Where are we at?
Yeah.
And all three of those are fun. Like, I'm not trying to dump on any of them. They're all, you know, cool stories that you could have a good time with, but you all need to be together.
Yeah, it's like everybody needs to be on the same page, and as long as that's it and everybody's having fun, like, ultimately it's fine. It's just when everybody's not on the same page that it starts going sideways.
Yep.
It's like, we have our RP group that's like here for all the narrative, and this is a gamist campaign where the boss is like heavily tweaked. It's like, that's not gonna work.
Yeah. And everybody wants, you know, when you give this story, and there were, you know, 1,000 responses to the next Dragon magazine that were essentially this. Like, my game sits squarely in the middle. It's narrative simulationist with gamist elements. And I'm like, I get that what you're going. I swear to you, you will be happier choosing what you are. Like, yeah. I've simulated a world where it's going to naturally go along a narrative, right? But there's gamist, and you're like, I swear to you, friend, just be a thing that you are.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in Lancer, I never say, where are the bad guys getting all these invisible mechs? They went to the invisible mech store, man. This is not. He's not tracking the Harrison Armory checkbook on where these invisible mechs come from. The point is, in this battle, they're all invisible. I had my players in my D&D game. There was this tower mission, right? The bad guys are up at the top of the tower, and this tower is like an interior staircase and all these landings. I've got all the different maps for like the levels and stuff.
Yep.
And the players are like, we're hanging outside the door and we're gonna use a mage hand to go in. And I was like, all right, every round you're outside the door, zombies are gonna appear. And you know, 1 zombie per player the first round, 2 zombies the next round. And I was just like, I can't find an in-campaign justification to do this, but I'm saying you need to get in this store and interact with this thing. I want you flipping between levels, like get in there, be heroes. Stop fucking around on the threshold, man. That's
Yeah, it's so weird when players are just not taking the threat of a situation seriously, and you're at a certain point you're like, I feel like there aren't dice being rolled. You're just going to start dying at this point.
I mean, you know, you don't want to penalize the players for missing the DM's cues, but you do want to get the story back on track. Let me gripe for just a second about a very specific thing.
Go ahead.
Mage hand. All right. Every DM has their own spell that they hate. Man, mage hand. Equivalent thing in a techno campaign would be like a little drone or whatever. Anything that's like, if there's a MacGuffin on a pedestal and I don't want to switch the bag of sand, I just go out in the hall and do it with my mage hand. I'm like, man, you've turned the bold heroic party into jerks waiting around a corner while they listen to your familiar watch your mage hand. Like, come on.
There's actually a weird real-world parallel. Like, in testing, they wanted to put, like, cameras on, like, the barrel of a tank so you could see around corners. And this was a great idea. And they also had it on, like, a mast on the top of the tank. So they're like, you can get information basically at will. And the problem was that the tank basically never moved, because every time they would go up to a corner, they would just, like, slowly peek, or they would, like... And they're like, eventually somebody needs to move. So they completely removed those features. They're like, the commander has the information, you take your orders from him. And, like, that also translates to, like, another Lancer campaign I was running where the party had a drone. And eventually enemies start shooting at or hacking the drone, because I'm tired of you taking, like, 10 minutes to scout the entire goddamn encounter. Like, this is just taking so long every time you do this, man.
There is a classic problem, and, you know, I'm a 20-year DM audience. I've done games from Hell to Breakfast, right? I've run weekly games for my whole life. When a player is like, I want to be a stealth guy, I've reached the point where I'm like, hey man, I want you to explain to me the way that you're being a stealth guy is going to interact with the game. And like, we need to work out jointly what kind of stealthy you are. Because if the players come up to an encounter and you want to have a pre-encounter where you go and stealth through the whole thing and like do a hitman, what you're actually saying is I want the other 4 players to listen to me play for 25 minutes. Like
yeah.
There's a degree of stealthy you can be, and if the whole party are stealthy and you're Ocean's 11, that could be cool. But otherwise, you know, you need to understand that your stealthy is going to be like about where you're positioned on the first turn, right? Or, you know, if somebody else in your Lancer team has a Barbarossa, you can only be this stealthy, right?
Yeah, this was the other thing is like, you know, nobody likes being on a team with Superman, but being on a team with Batman where the guy takes 20 minutes to prep any encounter and just kind of sits in the shadows the whole time isn't any more fun. Because either A, he's removed his health bar from the fight and is doing marginal damage, in which case you're getting beat, or B, he's actually so successful and so good at it that you don't need to be there because he's just one-shotting stealthing enemies. And it's like, this is not fun for the other players. As an individual campaign, that's a really cool idea. As a group campaign, not so much.
Yeah, the Skyrim stealth archer is not a person who should exist in most games. There was a point in one of your recent Lancer battles where I was going into that one player, and I was like, "Hey man, stop shooting the bad guys the NPCs are shooting, and come over here. We're dying." And he was like, "Well, I'm an archer behind my like wall thing," and I was like, "I just need your hit points over here, man. The DM will have bad guys attack you even if it doesn't make tactical sense because he doesn't want to kill us, but he's not going to have them wander over into the NPC fight. Come to us."
Yeah, at a certain point, you're like. Your character, like, there's a certain agreement in that your character build has to be able to work within a party of other people, you know? Some encounters you're the hero, some encounters you're the supporting character, and, you know, it's important to accept that.
A D&D equivalent is being like, "Hey, wizard, you need to go forward." And they're like, "But I'm a squishy." And I'm like, "But you have enough hit points that you need to be engaging in the battle, because otherwise... all of you've got 3 wizards and 1 warrior, and that warrior goes down in the first round because 10 NPCs are punching him. And now what are you doing? You know, like, you need to go and take your hits. I recognize it's not the part of your build you were excited about, but it just needs to happen.
Yeah, like party, like I don't know. There's a certain player element where players need to be a little flexible on not necessarily like their character concept, but like the specifics of a build, so that it like works within a party.
Yeah, like you've read X-Men comics, right?
Yeah.
When the story is about an individual X-Men, they get really intricate with their build, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an X-Men. Like Gambit gets to play cards with the bad guys, and everyone's surprised the cards explode or something, right? But when it's about the party fighting Apocalypse or whatever, he's just a guy who throws cards, and he's identical in every respect to a guy who shoots beams out of his eyes, right? Like, sometimes you're cool and the whole thing is about you, but other times the whole thing is about just sort of a general thing, and you are just a different way that your contribution looks at that time. You need to be sensitive to which of these things is true at a given moment and step up or down as the situation builds.
Yeah, my general philosophy as like a GM is that it's important to have encounters where some players get to feel like the hero, but it's also important to have encounters where they understand that they're going to be like the supporting character this time around.
Yeah, each encounter should, depending on where we are on that narrativist, simulationist, gamist triangle, it should fulfill that purpose, right? It should fulfill the purpose that the whole party as a team is experiencing at this moment in the game. Maybe they're coming to hate the bad guys more. Maybe they're coming to cherish the good guys they'll be protecting more, or finding out an important beat. And then inside of that greater purpose, right? Inside of whatever we're doing with regards to the story, or I don't know, whatever you call the equivalent of a story in a simulationist game. It also needs to allow individual players to express the theme that they're embroidering into the collaborative storytelling. The Barbarossa should be faced with people trying to move it or withstand its railgun. The stealth dude should be having a bunch of people attack and miss with his invisibility. Like, players should get to sing the song that they're trying to sing, but at the same time, the encounter also needs to move the thing forward. If you've ever seen Burn Notice, the old very formulaic TV show,
yep.
Every week they tried to, they had to out-con the con artist or out-heist the heist team, but then also Michael would find something out about who burned him, right?
Yeah.
And it's that balance.
Yeah, ultimately, like, the goal is to make, like, it's not that you don't want a player to be important, but rather that the players need to understand they're part of a team, and some people just go in with builds that are not compatible with that.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah, exactly like you said.
But of course, you also have the table etiquette element of builds that are technically part of a team, but so unbelievably obnoxious that you have to house rule them.
I heard that before I joined your game, someone was playing the Mine Robot. I don't know, man. I'll try a lot of stuff, but I don't think you would ever catch me trying the Mine Robot. I feel like if you want to be a mine guy, you fundamentally misunderstood how the table works.
Well, it's like, I take 2 actions every turn. They don't immediately do anything, go. And it's like, at a certain point, you're like, alright, this needs some very specific encounters to be good. Like, I can try to fish something up, but like, this is really rough.
So the bad guy stays behind his pedestal and shoots at you. Again. You're like, dang it, my mines.
The enemy doesn't move. Crap, my only move.
Yes.
But I also remember like the D&D classic of like, I have a reach weapon and I can like do trip attempts as like free attacks. It's like,
it's a gelatinous cube, mate. I don't know what tripping it would even look like.
You know what? Every enemy has reach weapons from now on because I don't want to deal with this.
You give them some. You their gimmick should work to some degree. But yeah, in your internal DM sheet, you're just like, okay, how many non-reach NPCs are kept out of the fighting by this jerk tripping people? And you sort of adjust the encounter balance to make sure things are still exciting.
Yeah, that's also the thing I found a lot with control elements, is like the party has to be careful with control elements because they negatively impact melee enemies so much more than ranged enemies. So it either means that the party can have infinite melee enemies and not care, but like a few ranged enemies wreck them, or I don't know. It screws up the balance a lot.
Yeah, no, every time he puts down that wall, I'm like, oh man, you're you are depleting a resource, which is Blaze's patience, and there's going to come a point where we're going to get wrecked because they're coming through this wall in great waves. Um,
Yeah.
and the DM's like, yeah, I balanced for you to succeed at all these roles. And the player's like, this game I didn't. And you're like, oh,
Yeah, it's like,
well, anyway.
I balanced for you to have this spell that would make melee enemies not able to move and attack, and you didn't cast it, so the party is getting the living hell beat out of them right now. Like,
Remember when
Yeah.
I had that one core power, and I was like, I'm losing this immediately. We are transitioning to any other core power because this one makes an encounter not happen, and the result of this is that we're gonna get destroyed because we're gonna do 2 encounters consecutively.
Yeah, it's like the issue with that core power is it's always like up in the air as to when you should use it, and as a GM, you're always planning around, okay, like at a certain point, if they haven't used the core power, they're good. If they have, they're probably screwed. So the balance gets really wonky really fast.
Right. The player is in that, well, I don't want to use the core power until the boss fight. And the DM is like, man, I don't want to have my boss fight till he uses core power. And I'm like, this is a Mexican standoff, but the DM has more Mexicans. I don't know how to. Anyway, the point is, you don't want to be in this state. So Blaze can trust. I began to just have my core power go off randomly at the start of encounters. As like a story element triggered the core power. Sorry, it's out. It's done. It was used on the very first trash encounter.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those like you almost need like multiple encounters per mission for that to really be viable because it makes one encounter pretty much a non-encounter, or you need like waves of enemies or other setups. But I mean, but like most systems have some kind of weird ability like that where it's like this encounter just isn't happening now. And you're like, great.
Yeah, when I built the character, I was in like a wargaming mindset, and I was like, man, this is an incredibly powerful ability. You know, a tenth of the time when enemies attack this character, they become paralyzed for a whole turn. You know, it's huge. And then I actually began to play it. Now it's like, oh no, a tenth of the time when enemies attack me, they become paralyzed. They've stopped attacking me. They're only attacking my allies now. This is the worst.
Although I wouldn't say that's quite as bad as like trying to deal with your party spamming stuff like prismatic wall. You're like,
oh yeah, no, that's awful.
It's like I don't even know what half of these like saves are. Like, do we have like a spreadsheet?
There's a bit in like Pathfinder: Wrath of the Righteous or games like that where they let you be like an assassin who's like, I do all these poison moves, and then the game is entirely about fighting devils that are immune to poison. And you were like, I can't help but feel that you knew this, big game. You know, you knew that this was going to happen, and it's really kind of a sneaky move on your part to let this happen. You know?
Yeah, there is like I don't know. There's always a certain part of gaming the system in terms of how much meta knowledge the players have over available enemies.
Yep.
Like, you know, we're going into this D&D like pre-built campaign, but we know for a fact that there are no of enemy X and a lot of enemy Y, so we will build for enemy Y. But then, of course, as the GM, you find the only enemy X in that entire setting, you throw it at them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a delicate balance you strike as DM between being like, players, your gimmick is working, experience the joy of your gimmick working, and being like, players, your gimmick is not going to work in this encounter, experience the joy of improvisation. You know?
Yeah.
Like, if the bad guys have chain guns, you should send some waves to get mowed down. That's why they brought chain guns. You know, they get to feel like heroes. But then they should face a tank that doesn't, you know, care about their chain guns. Now they have to figure out a cool other strategy.
Yeah, like...
You know, it's all about variety.
Like, getting players to vary it up is nice, but players get very attached to their gimmicks, so the instant their gimmick doesn't work, they feel like you have one out for them, and it's like, I don't have one I don't have one out for you, man. I'm just trying to, like, create some variety.
I do love the player who will, like, 10 consecutive encounters where they are the hero, and they're annihilating everyone with their sniper rifle, and then you have an encounter in the smoke, and they're like, this is such BS. I've got my sniper, and there's all this smoke. I can't see anybody until they're 5 feet away from me. The DM is, you know, like, man, these people, and you're like, okay, but like, I had pistols, and I didn't say nothing in the 10 previous encounters where you were killing people from 10 miles out. You know, like, kill, man.
Yeah, it's always one of those like. Figuring out what will make your players upset is something that a lot of new GMs, I imagine, will struggle with pretty hard. because it is all over the place.
Moving into a slightly more serious main, making your players upset, as long as they are upset at the story elements and not upset at the game master, is a complicated dance. Because you want heat, right? Like, you want the players to be mad at Darth Vader, right?
Yeah, you want them to be invested.
Right, exactly. But they shouldn't be invested because they think you're using jank moves that are nonsense. They should be invested because this story element is doing its story purpose. So you have to get, in wrestling terms, there's heat and there's X-Pac heat. Heat is, I want to see this guy get pinned. X-Pac heat is, I don't want to see this guy on the table.
Yeah.
You have to hit that balance.
Yeah, that's like a balancing factor that it's hard to strike in terms of like writing the NPC, but also not making it feel like you as the GM are just trying to punish the players.
Yep.
Ultimately, like, good bad guy NPCs is probably like a whole other topic, because there's a lot that goes into making one that is like a compelling enemy.
Yeah, I think that, like, most players are pretty jaded regarding enemies. The bad guy will be like, I intend to kill you and make you a dead person. And the player's like, you join a list of 50,000 people that want to kill me and make me a dead person. And, like, Thanos, the classic big bad that everybody thought was pretty cool, was actually less dangerous than, like, Cobra Commander. Right?
Yeah.
Like, Cobra Commander wants to kill everybody. Thanos wants to kill half of everybody. And somehow that really worked. People like, he wants to kill half of people? That's so many people. And it was like, wait, what? Like, but it worked, It was the, it was a big successful movie franchise, right? Like, you have to, your NPC has to stand out somehow. And just being like, I crave your death is not actually sufficient. Players blow that off immediately.
Yeah.
They have to, like, want to burn down your sacred forest or whatever.
Yeah, usually NPCs that are just like, I mindlessly kill things are like side villains. They're not like the main villain. Because, like, as a side villain, somebody who's very straightforward and a complete prick to the party will try to kill them on sight is perfectly fine and works really well.
Yeah, no, like, the motivation of the ogre that you encounter in the forest is that you're dinner. And you fight that guy, but you don't, it's not like the song of my rivalry will last for eons, like, you're not kidnapping that guy's sister, like, he's just a forest ogre. It's whatever. On the other hand, the enmity of, like, our rival knights think that our methods are not good enough because they're more hardcore and they want to show us up on the battlefield is the sort of thing that the players can get really attached to, right? And if the NPCs that are mission givers are like, well, we were going to give you this mission where you stop the launch of the villainous super weapon, but we're going to give that to the rivals instead. What you're going to be doing is defending the national park from poachers. Yeah. The players are like, man, I hate these rivals. Now I'm fighting poachers instead of stealing a Zeppelin. And, you've got some real, and then naturally the bad guys make a hash of it and you have to go rescue their mission. Like, it's all about, like, variety of heat. I don't know, I kind of rambled there.
Yeah, like, I fully understand. When you have, like, I don't know, rivals or even arch villains, it's about putting the party in a position where they don't just hate them because they're evil, they hate them for, like, other reasons. And the fastest way to do that is obviously to have the bad guy break their stuff, but,
Oh, yeah. Because that hits them on a Gamest level. If the bad guy steals your sniper rifle and the game's like, you don't have a sniper rifle now, the sniper player is lost his entire mind. Like, I gave the bad guy, so in my D&D game, one of the players is a wizard, and I gave him an amulet that, like, it has an NPC's name on it, and every time you cast a spell, you roll a d6, and if you roll equal to or under the level of the spell you cast, you get to, you are equal to, if you roll over the spell you cast, you get to keep it, right? So you can cast your low-level spells over and over again, and the more powerful it is, the less likely the odds are you get to cast again, right? So it gives the wizard some endurance and lets him do, these long battles and contribute more. And the player, like, much love for this item. Huge props, getting referenced over and over, because he gets to roll after his roll. Like, I magic missile you, and do I keep the spell? Yes, I didn't roll a 1, I keep the spell, And then they encounter an NPC who's like, "Oh man, you've got a really big debt." And the player's like, "What?" And they're like, "Oh, you're using that at that thing. The interest must be killing you." And the player's like, "Wait, what's he talking about?" And it's like this amulet is charging him every time he uses it, and now he owes all this, mystical money to this NPC he's never met, whose name is on the amulet. And it was this whole story, Pete. And all of a sudden, he's like, "I don't know if I want to use this thing when I cast these spells." Like it's.
I love how
But-
I love like simple mechanical things that seem innocuous on the surface, but in reality have like deep story beats.
Yeah,
'Cause actually-
it's so cool.
I did that with one of my older campaigns with the fast travel system, because like on the surface it looks like a fast travel system to allow the party to go from city to city. They're, these magical gates. And then the party realizes the horrifying truth that they're like powered by demons and they're going to be used to take over the world or whatever.
I was thinking that you were going to be like, you're actually going between gates in different worlds, and because the places are weeks apart, you're probably going to do this a couple times before you realize it.
That would also be a pretty cool idea. Just like those like subtle ways to pull the rug out from under the player with things that like look like they're pure mechanical advantage.
I'll say one thing you're trying to get around there is the players will generally not knowingly do bad stuff, but the beat of being blamed for the bad stuff that you did is extremely powerful when the DM wants to do it. So having them inadvertently mess up, and they will feel like it's honest when NPCs are mad about it, is very valuable. And when you rug pull them like that, it's great.
Oh yeah. It's also, I don't know, one of the things I like to do with evil NPCs is have them actually be more evil than the party thinks they are. Like they look they look cartoonishly evil, but in reality they are purely psychotic.
Oh yeah. NPCs, you think they have a rule, but then you discover that they don't have that rule. It's such a great beat.
Yeah, I remember it was like one of the older campaigns. The party was like, we will help this NPC take over this city. We know she's evil, but like, she can't be that evil. And then she depopulates the city. Like, she actually is way worse than you think she is.
Yep. How to phrase it? The difficulty involved in attempting to have your players support the one admiral who he's pretty sure is not going to start the apocalypse can get quite interesting quite fast, to refer to a game that we're both in.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I don't know, creating NPCs in general is just it's a balancing act, because the likable NPCs sometimes end up being unlikable, and the unlikable NPCs sometimes end up being sympathetic if you're not like careful.
Oh yeah, like and you should let that happen. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. If the players latch on to an NPC and they just go to town, you're like, you know what? They're now your rival. They weren't intended to be, but let's go with it.
Right. No, if the players, the most valuable currency at the table is player investment, right? So like, I had a game long ago back at Georgia Tech where there was a little station outside a dungeon, and when you came out, the guy would take the king's tax off you, and you had to give 10% of your gold to him. And boy, the players did not like that. Like, you have never seen a group, speed run the anarchist pipeline faster than the people getting taxed. And one day the tax inspector took their new magical sword instead of taking the money, because he said it was the same amount. And I realized, I was like, he is the big bad of the game. Like, they don't care about what's at the bottom of the dungeon. They care about what's at the top. They want this tax guy's head. And that was then we just moved into an urban game. The players became like Robin Hood. And I was like, okay, what they care about is what I care about, right? Like, if they don't like this tax man, we can lean into it, man. He's gonna have a surcharge per healing potion. Like, it's really dark.
Yeah, the current campaign, like, the party made a deal with, like, a somewhat amoral mercenary, and they're like, this is a pretty upstanding guy. It's like, I don't know, this guy just on a practical level doesn't want to fight if he doesn't have to, but he will absolutely kill all of you. But the party is like, no, this guy's, like, he's pretty cool. I'm like, all right. I guess he's just, like, chill with the party now.
Cool by certain standards, but, like, yeah. It's, how to phrase it. It is, it's always interesting to see what the party cares about, because you can never predict it. Like, players, the more of them that there are just, they're a chaos engine. The dice are not the most crazy thing at the table. It's the players. It's always been the players, man. They're out to get me.
had like one NPC. It's just this innocuous like bookkeeping NPC, and the party hated him, and I have no idea why. And I was like, all right, we'll lean into it. He's gonna be as much of a douchebag as possible from now on.
Yep. Yeah, I how to phrase it. I think it's very hard to go too far with an NPC chewing the scenery. You know, this is an innately cartoonish medium, and if someone's going to be M. Bison, you know, let him be M. Bison. There's no reward for restraint. It's not real world stuff. You know, like have him threaten all the scenery.
Oh yeah, just have the NPC be as over the top as you need them to be to like convey the message or elicit some kind of response.
Yeah. Yes, he will kick the dog immediately.
But of course, you always have to watch out for like big bad NPCs for the campaign because the party might start to accidentally like them too much. It's like, how did your campaign end? Well, the party decided to help the villain. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, it can go that way, but you know, typically that's not what you want.
Or sometimes party members become the villain.
You know, we both seen it, right? Like, I had to be like, I think Magnus is the good brother. Like, I'm honestly looking at this, and I'm like, you know, I think as an unbiased observer, I think Tellus is the worst.
Yeah, it's like the final campaign boss is somehow Tellus of Felgar, who is the person that will probably get his ass beat the most in this fight.
Audience, this is just us referring to a recent game that we were in. One of my players was kind of, I'm going to use the tools of evil to defeat evil, but then he used so many tools of evil that evil was like, chill up, man, you're inventing new tools. And he was like, The party was horrified. It was pretty great.
To give some context, this individual entered a deal with the devil and rolled badly on his check. He's a lawyer, but apparently he just fails these. And the party member ended up basically owing the devil a certain number of souls that would gradually increase. So his solution was to make a soul pyramid scheme in which he had low-level priests recruiting innocent people to funnel their souls to the devil.
And he rolled incredibly well on those rolls. Like, those rolls, like setting up the social engineering of that, killed that.
Oh yeah, he rolled terribly to be a lawyer the entire campaign, but setting up a soul pyramid scheme, he rolled amazing.
Yeah, it's like, all right, this went a different way than I thought.
That was also one of those campaigns where like I kind of took the dice rolls and ran with them, because originally the concept of the character was that he was kind of stupid, but then he just like nat 20'd so many early dice rolls that it was like, all right, I guess he's actually a savant in mechanics.
Yeah, all right.
Like it's hard to justify him being stupid when he succeeded at everything so far.
Yeah, no, I didn't set out to have Blaze's character be a techno. Yeah, we're getting really deep in on this game. The point is the campaign became steampunk just because this one player was like, I'm a goblet inventor and I build robots, and I was like, you do, and now there are robots, and one of the villains is a robot, and like we went really deep in this robot rabbit hole. Gotta respect the players.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. When I'm RPing a character, sometimes I RP to stats, but also sometimes you just start RPing based on dice rolls, because if the dice are like, your character's just bad at this thing, you're like, all right, well, you know, let's just run with that. Like, it's more fun that way.
Exactly. Yeah, it is precisely how that is. The dice are also in the game, and they're also telling a story. A shout out, by the way, to the Cypher system. I saw all the Monty Cook branding, and I was like, oh, this is probably going to be a little overhyped. But then we started playing, and it was like, no, really, the players make every roll. And I was like, that's actually kind of cool. I kind of hate rolling dice as the DM. What if the players just did it? Huh.
Yeah, what if all the failures are on the players? Although,
yeah, I mean, don't hate it.
A system where you have to like buff your dice rolls by also effectively taking damage is a little dodgy.
Yeah, that was always the worry, and it still kind of is. But I decided to play it as it was, regardless of that worry. And you know, darned if it didn't support a 3-year game. Yeah,
it was overall like the system generally worked more often than it didn't, I would say.
Yeah, just being like, my character wants to go into Hogwarts. I'm like, okay, well, roll a mind check to trick the guards. Okay, I want to persuade Dumbledore to help. Okay, well, you can't. You know, like it was very It was very easy to understand what needed to happen.
Yeah, like there is a lot to be said for a system that has an element of simplicity to it, especially if you have players that are new to the system or even new to RPing in general. It's like, this is difficulty 1, you need a 3. It's like, okay, that's easy. You know, it just multiplies by 3 each time.
Yep. It's just 1d20 and then you're done. You know, like there was a lot to be said for it. Random shout out to the Cypher system.
Yeah, like we might discuss like some of the merits or drawbacks of other systems on like a later episode, but you know, it is just a.
Yeah,
But since like we're on the subject of like a lot of RNG and character stuff, like the Cypher system does have a pretty interesting way to go about it.
Yeah. There's just that 1d20 and you don't innately have, you know, advantage or anything like that, and that typically that d20 decides the whole outcome of whatever you're trying to do, you know. And I thought that was neat.
We had one character that was like, he had the ability to identify things, except he didn't, because he never passed a single roll.
Never passed the intelligence. Yes.
He made like 10 or 15 of them, and he never passed a single one. Like, some of them were like, he needed a 3 on a d20, and he just failed. It's like, alright. I guess he actually doesn't have this ability after all. Maybe he's just crazy. He's just gaslighting himself into thinking he can identify items.
There is nothing funnier to me, and my character will always do it, than giving a player a check that everyone in the world knows they should pass, having them fail, and then the player being like, my character lies. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you're like, roll a 3+ to identify the magic sword. And you're like, I failed. And you're like, this sword is really good on Mondays. Yeah, it fucks people up on Mondays, but you know, the rest of the week, it's just a normal sword. And then the player's going to turn someone to stone with it, and you're like, oh, I mean, obviously it turns people to stone, but the Monday thing is the main part that they identify. You know, like,
that's really the big enchantment, is that it's more effective on Mondays.
Right, like you just a player who is an unrepentant flim-flam man is a lot of fun.
Yeah, in general, like RPing your character to where they don't necessarily admit to making all of their mistakes can be a lot of fun.
Sometimes what the party needs is a total doofus.
Let's
say, as a player, one thing you can offer the DM very gracefully is a character who is not damaged by failure. Like, a lot of players play concepts that are kind of fragile. Like, concepts that are like, this character is an invincible swordsman. And you're like, what does this character react to if he fails to be a swordsman? And it's like, but if you were like, my character is Homer Simpson, then all of a sudden, you know, failure is built in. It's baked in. Everybody knows what it looks like when this guy fails, you know?
Yeah, it's like, I am Zorro, the master duelist. No one is better than I. Oh god, I just lost my first fight. Crap.
Yeah, you're like, huh. Well, I mean, that there can also be a really cool character, right? Like, don't get me wrong, you know, the straightforward and invincible hero can be very cool, but somebody in your party can take a pratfall, and that's very important for certain, you know, story beats, because then the players can rescue you, or, you know, all that sort of things.
Yeah, it goes back to, like, circles back to some of the topics at the beginning of this episode, where it's like, you know, failure states. Like, if your character can't really respond effectively to a failure state, then it raises some questions about how you respond to the world and the environment.